Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm back today. I'm your host and we're recording on a pleasant Monday afternoon here in Manchester after Manchester United defeated Wolves 2-0 on Saturday afternoon in the Premier League. Back to winning ways at Old Trafford, and what a day for football it was. The sun was shining, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and my two colleagues were there in the press box as usual, Samuel Luckhurst and Tyrone Marshall, who are of course on board with me for the next 45 minutes or so. To start off with, Samuel, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you? Did you win much money at Chester?
I did win a bit. It wasn't as good as it could have been. I was waiting on a horse and lass for quite a bit, and if I'd won that, I probably wouldn't be on the podcast today. I'd probably be on a flight to Barbados or somewhere a lot nicer than Salford, but nonetheless, a good day. Ty, how are you?
Yes, good. Thank you, Stephen. Good. Glad to hear you at least had one enjoyable day this weekend anyway.
You've got to have them every now and then. You've got to shoot yourself, don't you, Ty? Of course. But we'll get stuck into the football action then, Samuel. Obviously, a 2-0 win. I tweeted after the game, I said I kind of felt like I've watched that game quite often this season where United will get a goal, they'll look incredibly comfortable, but they seem to be lacking kind of that cutting edge to kill off opponents. Obviously, they got the goal in injury time with Garnacho, which was great to see on his return. So what was your general verdict leaving the stadium, your reaction? Because at the end of the day, it was an important win after back-to-back defeats, wasn't it? It was really crucial.
You weren't the only one who thought that. There was never a point where United looked uncomfortable or looked in danger of dropping points in that game. But it was a weird one to write because it was the same old. It was familiar fare. It was a pretty routine goal taken, but they weren't clinical. They didn't score enough goals again, which at some stage of the season you were thinking that the goal difference, that could be a problem for them. It probably won't be, but if it still is, and that's going to be particularly galling looking into the last couple of weeks of the season. But really there was nothing to take away from that performance until Garnacho came on and scored. And I think 5 of the 9 questions that Ten Hag faced afterwards were on Garnacho because it was his first game in 8 weeks and he made such a positive contribution. But I think going into it, because of the situation Wolves were in, even though they were mathematically assured of safety, their away record was and is still terrible. I think they've only won 2 away from home all season. United couldn't have hoped for a better team to come up against at Old Trafford, and yet despite all that, you sense that United were never going to take them to the cleaners, because that's not United this season, and that United, the ruthless United of old, that's not returning this season. This is not a season of vintage United. It's about getting points on the board and climbing up the ladder, which they are doing, and they absolutely had to do after the 2 away defeats to Brighton and West Ham. So although a lot of supporters might have gone away feeling a bit underwhelmed by it, despite the game ending on a high with Garnacho clinching it in the 94th minute, it's still a step closer to qualifying for the Champions League, and that's, I think it was De Gea who put it in one of his posts after the game. He said they're one step closer to one of their objectives, and we've always maintained that a successful season for United would be finishing in the top 4 and winning a trophy. They've won a trophy. They really should be finishing in the top 4. They should have had it boxed off some time ago when you consider the points they've dropped in recent weeks. Tottenham springs to mind. They should not have been getting beaten by West Ham, but they did deserve to lose that game. So they're making hard work of it, and Ten Hag is even playing on that cliche now about how they always make things difficult for themselves, which is something that became a cliche during the Ferguson years, and Ten Hag felt the need to mention it in his programme, and then he mentioned it twice at his post-match debrief as well. So it doesn't feel like there's a great deal of drama about United at the moment, and Wolves didn't even have an attempt on target, which made it quite peculiar when Lopetegui said afterwards, he said that he felt I think he used the word dominated. He's just they dominated phases of the game when that was absolutely not the case. Their best player was Dan Bentley, who had a very good game in goal and made a particularly good save from Sancho. It was well struck. He did give the keeper a prayer by hitting it too close to him, but he still did brilliantly to get down that quickly and turn it wide for a corner. So it should have been a much more handsome win from United, but I don't think anybody was expecting that from them, because they don't do that this season. They've only scored 4 goals in 2 games, so maybe that will come back next season, but we keep on coming away from these performances, win, lose or draw at the moment, with the same takeaways.
3 points is 3 points, of course, exactly. And I think we all had a suspicion that Wolves were probably going to be on the beach. It was going to be that kind of performance. But I was surprised at how two-first they were to the extent, as you say, 0 shots on target. They really didn't trouble United. And it was surprising to see some fans give De Gea some praise after. I thought, well, I could have stood and go, and I think on that afternoon and not conceded, because they really, really didn't.
Was that just because of the clean sheets table, is it?
Well, yeah. And do you know what? He's almost guaranteed to win it, I think, now, isn't he? Because there's only 3 games remaining. Yeah. He's 3 ahead. So, a bizarre little thing to take from the season. Anyways, Garnacho, let's discuss him, because it was an excellent finish. Came on in the 81st minute. His 5th goal of the season. He's just had his new contract. He's just got his new teeth. He's got that beach blonde hair we discussed, I think last week. We said he's the Ronaldo transformation, isn't it? It's the beginning of that. But it was really good to see him score. Obviously, his celebration as well. He was obviously delighted. What did you think of his little cameo? And more importantly, next season, I know Ten Hag discussed it, and we'll get on to Fernandes' comments in a bit from the mix zone, but do you think he can really put pressure on Rashford for a starting place in that team on the left?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. It feels unlikely at the moment, given what Rashford's done this season with 29 goals, but certainly I think there's going to be decisions to be made on the wing next year. His cameo was good. Any 9-minute appearance that ends with a goal, you've got to say he's done quite well. There was a break before that when he actually overhit a pass to Fernandes when Fernandes was making an overlapping run from him, which probably showed a little bit of a lack of sharpness, and probably to be expected, really, when you've just back after not playing for that long. But took his goal really well, showed composure to get rid of the defender, and a good finish, really, when, like Samuel said, Bentley had made a couple of saves, I think Fernandes and Sancho, and the Sancho one was a really good save. Fernandes was straight at him, and too many of United's shots were either low percentage efforts or shots straight at him. So he did take his goal well. He was the one person that felt like he might be a story all afternoon. The fans were singing his name from the moment he started warming up for the first time, and he's clearly very popular there. He gives them something different. There's a real buzz every time he gets on the ball, and he's running forward. And I think it's probably a stretch to say he might be ousting Fernandes and Rashford next year, but I think certainly he'll be playing a lot. Rashford can play up front as well, and we don't know what the striker situation is going to be next year, who they're going to sign, whether Marshall will leave. But there is a backlog really on the wings. You've got Garnacho and Rashford on the left. Next year you could have Antony and maybe Ahmad on the right. Sancho as well. You'd say he could easily be third choice for both positions next season. He was pretty ineffective again, and he just, it's hard to believe it's the same player that you saw at Dortmund. There's just so little zip to his game, so little confidence to his game.
Season.
Yeah. He has, yeah. I mean, when he came back from that absence, there was a real groundswell of support for him at Old Trafford. He scored fairly early on in his return. Can't remember exactly which game it was, and he looked, for 3 or 4 games, it looked like it had done him some good. He looked sharp, but it's just regressed again seemingly, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of confidence to him when he's playing, and you just don't expect anything, because you're not really getting anything from him. And his record for, I'd done a piece on the day of the game about the front three and their record, and for Sancho it was 1 goal and assist in 850 minutes or something like that. That's over 900 minutes now. Obviously, I don't think it was any surprise when he went off, and he's the one that you're going to think's under pressure next year. I mean, there could even be an argument they cash in on him, but I just don't know what sort of market you'd get for a player like that. But he's the one that you'd look at next year and think there's probably not going to be a lot of minutes there. And if he prefers to play on the left, which it seems is the case, and United sign a striker, I mean, you'd have him below Rashford and Garnacho for sure. So I think there's decisions to be made there out wide. You look at players like Palestri and Elanga, I mean, they've just got to go. But yeah, Garnacho deserves certainly to be very close to the starting lineup, and he could even force his way in before the end of the season if Rashford's still unavailable or Rashford's playing through the middle. You'd have Garnacho on the left ahead of Sancho at the moment for sure.
It's frustrating with Sancho, because I feel like on this podcast we talk about him, and he produces these moments like against Tottenham when he scored that great goal, and you kind of think, right, come on, kick on from here, and it just doesn't happen, does it? When he has these moments, he's not really sustaining it across a full 90 minutes or making a genuine impact. But there was another positive. Samuel for Varane was really good on his comeback from injury. Obviously, it was great to see him back as well. A polished performance, I think it's fair to say. How key will he be in the running? Obviously, 3 games left in the league. We've got the FA Cup final against Manchester City, because Ten Hag said before the game, look, he knows how to win. He's got that experience. He's going to bring that to the team. But also, I think when Varane comes back into the team, he's obviously next to Lindelof, and that allows Shaw to start a left back, and that's really important, isn't it? Because Shaw's just fantastic going down that side and roaming forward.
Yeah, Shaw was pretty good again. His performance level of late has been it's been consistently high, I'd say. I know at Brighton it was the one we said he didn't put a foot wrong, but then he raised his hand and he gave away the penalty. And wherever he plays, he's doing very well. I think he's had a good season by and large as well. And it will be interesting to see, provided Varane is fit and stays fit for the FA Cup final, whether Ten Hag reverts to a right-footed and a left-footed defensive partnership and bringing Shaw back inside and playing Malacia there, because that is what he did in January. It's easily forgotten that Tyrone Malacia actually started when United beat City at Old Trafford. You think Malacia in the derby and you just think of him getting rinsed by Phil Foden and being taken off at half-time. It was almost like a carbon copy of what happened to Patrice Evra on his United debut at City all those years ago. But Varane is he's still one of the best centre-backs in the world. And you knew when Ten Hag confirmed that he was fit on Friday, that he was available, you knew that when he said he was coming back, he'd be coming back straight into the team. It wouldn't be on the bench. And I thought it was quite right what he did in retaining Lindelof. Lindelof completely deserved to continue at centre-half. Malacia is not really, in the chances that he's had of late, he did okay against Villa, but that's been his performance level, really. It's been okay, and okay cannot be seen as good enough, really. So the selections were completely correct, and of course it was another clean sheet, and it's pretty peculiar in this season where United have been thumped a good number of times, and the goalkeeper really should be on the way out, but it looks like he'll stick around, that they have got the most number of clean sheets in the league this season, and that is mainly down to the improvement in the defence. And as I said, I think Martinez, Varane and Shaw individually have had seasons ranging from very good to great, possibly, depending on how it ends. Diallo had a good first few months of the season. Malacia actually had a pretty good start to his United career. And Lindelof of late has made a good contribution as well. So the defensive state of the team is actually in a pretty good shape. So it might surprise some that there's the possibility that United could sign a couple of defenders in the summer, but I think that's more down to the need for outgoings, and there are question marks over both right backs, really. I mean, Diallo still hasn't signed a new contract. Wan-Bissaka is at the moment he's the first choice right back, but he has a ceiling, and I think that United can't really get ahead of themselves there. And look, for all the options at centre half on Saturday, nobody was considering the £80 million captain, which is again a sign of where he's at. But again, I'm not sure there's any room actually left in Harry Maguire's coffin. But if you can fit another nail in it, there's another nail to hammer in there. So it's impressive what Ten Hag has overseen. As I said, despite these, at the time it felt like they were aberrations, but then they would concede 4 at Brentford, and then it would be 6 at City, and then it would be 7 at Anfield. So although they've got that in them, by and large they've done very well, and Varane being more available has been key to that. And it did say a lot about his presence, that during his absence they only won 2 of the 7 games that he was unavailable for. I think if he was playing in Seville, there's no way United would have lost that game 3-0.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We'll have a quick word on Antony then, Ty, before we moved into the next part, actually, because I thought he was really bright, creative, inventive. He was in the centre of most things, really, in the action going forward, but he just couldn't find the goal, could he? He had multiple chances and he just couldn't put it away. And I guess that kind of goes to the wider point this season, where you've got a few attackers in that team that really just haven't been pulling their weight regarding goals.
No, absolutely not. He did do quite well. I thought the assist was good. It would be easy to take the shot on there, but when you've got a record in front of goal like Antony, you're probably desperate for a pass as well. But he did show composure to find the right pass. the header was the one that you looked at and thought he's got to score that. The one just before the goal, I mean, it was really poor technique. But I do think there's been signs of improvement recently. They're not really translating to numbers. I mean, that was his third assist in 42 games this season. For a winger who's cost £85 million at a club like United, that's just diabolical, basically. He's got to be
See
what
what you really
creating.
think, Tyrone.
I mean, 3 assists
That's
in
what we want.
41 games. In a front 3, it's nowhere near good enough. And he has scored some goals, to be fair. His goal, I think it's 8 this season, which is not bad. I think him and Sancho are both, in terms of 90 minutes, 1 in 4. Like, they're both scoring about 1 in 4, which I think you'd want 1 in 3 at least from a. If you're playing a front 3, you'd want 1 in 3 at least. So I think there's got to be improvement from there. But his creativity, it's getting better, but it's still not enough. And at the end of the day, the number of assists you get is partly dependent on whether people are putting away the chances. But it doesn't feel like you're watching Antony thinking he's teeing up chances left, right, and centre. His decision making in the final third is still not always brilliant. He's still a bit too predictable, and I think part of the reason he probably doesn't create a lot of chances is because he slows the play down and defenders can read it. But there is definitely room for improvement there, and I think he's always going to have this fee around his neck. You mentioned Maguire was the £80 million defender previously. Antony's the £85 million winger. He's clearly not worth that at the moment. The fact United paid that when they could clearly have got him cheaper 2 months prior to that, had they been more committed at that stage, they could have got a deal for more than that. I mean, Ajax fleeced them at the end of the window because Ten Hag was so desperate for him. That's always going to be held against him in a way, but this is still, it's his first season in what you call an elite league, really. He's had 2 years at Ajax, essentially doing what he wants going forward. So it's understandable there's going to be a bedding in process. And I think we've seen as the season's gone on that there has been some improvement for sure.
Yeah, next season will be the acid test one. If Antony really needs to start stepping up his output. I think I did a piece last week and I looked at between Weghorst, Marshall, Antony and Sancho. I think they average 1.5 league goals between them this season, each per month. So 1.5 league goals per month between 4 players. That is just so poor, isn't it? But it's not actually a surprise. Confirms the visual impression they've left behind.
Antony's probably been the best of those 4 as well, in that he is quite a creative player, and there have been signs of, as Ty said, improvement recently, particularly the performance at Forest. And it was strange actually having to rate him on Saturday because he did get an assist, but the first shot he should have played Marshall in rather than going for goal. He had other opportunities, he didn't get a goal. It seemed like at the end Bentley made quite a good save from him at the near post, and he was looking up to the heavens as if to say, like, why is this happening to me? But he has to look at himself, because it's not a coincidence that he's starting these games and his first shot, it's going wide of the post. I think that's 3 games running from him now. The Brighton one, he certainly should have hit the target. Maybe at West Ham there was an element of misfortune, but he's very much a work in progress. And I think for now, where United are doing quite well, he's getting a bit of a free pass. If they weren't doing well, the scrutiny it would be tumbling down on him. It really would. So it's in his interest to have a much better second season.
So I was going to say, he's benefiting from something Sancho didn't have in that respect, and that he is going a bit under the radar because United are doing so well, whereas there was pressure on Sancho to deliver next year because the whole team was a bit of a disaster. So he didn't kind of get away with it in the sense that Antony might be this year, and you wondered, Sancho's basically not recovered from that bad season and the criticism he got when if this was his first season and he was doing okay but generally underperforming, there'd probably be a bit more leeway than he actually got.
He would have still missed 3 months, wouldn't he? Which is, it's been a difficult time for Sancho since obviously joining the club. It's not all been straightforward, is it? I was going to say, just before we wrap up this part, if it was Ferguson in charge, he probably would have contacted Wolves' goalkeeper's agent after the game, which was the game we had. But you never know. Ten Hag had dinner with him the other week, so he might have took a finger for his playbook. You never know. Anyways, we'll leave that for part 1, and we'll be back for part 2. Now, I got this wrong the other month when we went into a little mix zone segment when I believe I mistook Samuel for going to the mix zone when he didn't at the press conference or vice versa. So can I confirm, Tyrone, it was you in the mix zone on Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, wasn't it?
It was, yes. It was. I was there.
Bruno Fernandes, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It was quite quick, to be fair. United were very efficient in getting a player to. We're so efficient that I was actually still in the press box finishing some work when I got a message from a member of the communications team. So full credit to them for bringing someone and a good player as well, not just a big name player, but Fernandes
is the best talker in the squad,
probably the best talker in that squad. Yeah,
well, that's why I thought it was worth asking about it, Ty, because obviously I read the piece, and his comments on Garnacho were really interesting, and the kind of the role he's took in his development. And we all know his attitude wasn't the best on pre-season tour. That was kind of ironed out, and obviously now he's enjoying a bit more improved fortune. So could you kind of touch upon what Fernandes said about Garnacho, really? Because I thought it was quite interesting. It was worth telling the listeners if they've not read the piece.
Yeah, well, that was my question, Stephen. So thank you for thinking it was interesting. Yeah, we were with my colleagues, we were discussing about asking about Garnacho, and it occurred to me that it was one to ask that Fernandes was. He was criticised for it on social media at the time when he mentioned Garnacho. So I think he called it a poor attitude on tour, and obviously we knew by then that he hadn't played on tour and that he'd been late a couple of times and basically been disciplined by Ten Hag and left out. But Fernandes brought it into the open. It was after Garnacho scored his first goal against Sociedad, and Fernandes was, I can't remember if it was with MUTV or the broadcasters or BT Sport, but he was obviously asked about Garnacho, and just off his own bat said he had a poor attitude on the tour. And it's interesting when you see a senior player bringing that into the open. And I remember at the time he was criticised for it, as people saying he was digging him out and throwing him under the bus, but he obviously said that for a reason. And he basically said on Saturday that was the manager's. The manager had said that in a way, and Fernandes was just putting that message back across. But he did go on to talk about how he's maybe taking him under his wing a little in training. Said he speaks to him when they're at the training ground. Is quite what he said. If he hears, he hears. If he doesn't want to, he doesn't want to. But you get the impression he is doing, because he mentioned a few occasions, kind of hinting that his attitude's improved and that he wouldn't be getting the minutes he is if he wasn't doing what Ten Hag wants of him. So there was some quite interesting stuff on their relationship. It gave the impression that Fernandes is having quite a big influence on him. We know Garnacho obviously looked up to Ronaldo to the point that he now looks like Ronaldo. So it's probably good that there's another player there who's having a real influence on him, and it did seem that Fernandes fits that bill. Fernandes mentioned Garnacho doing an interview where he mentioned that Bruno was helping him a lot. So yeah, it was quite interesting stuff, and it did put that comment back in November about saying publicly Garnacho had a poor attitude in context. And you need senior players like that in the dressing room, that he might be 18 but he is still willing to call him out on it and make it public, and at the same time guiding him to do the right things. And he did say a couple of times as well, there was probably 3 or 4 questions on Garnacho, and he said to a couple of them that I don't want to big him up too much, basically, because that's the danger with young players, that you keep talking about how good they are and eventually it goes to their head, and there is still clearly room for improvement there. So trying to keep his feet on the ground. But yeah, I left that chat thinking that Bruno was certainly a player that was having an impact on Garnacho.
I mean, if you remember when you guys were out in Thailand last year, I was the only outfield player not to make a single appearance. When you look at, I think it was Teeth Chong got minutes and he was always going to leave, which seemed a bit bizarre, but then obviously transpired and that came out, which made a lot more sense. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer then, Samuel, let's discuss that, because he made his return to Old Trafford, didn't he? First time since he was dismissed as manager in late 2021. But we'll discuss his comments about the Glazers as well, because he said, look, they've been neglecting the club, it's time for a takeover, it's time for change. But I guess when you looked at his comments when he was manager, he said Joe Glazer loved the club. He said the Glazers were committed to the club. So where do you stand on this, Samuel? Because I've saw some people praising Solskjaer for coming out and saying it, but it also feels like he perhaps should have done a little bit more when he was manager, but then you could argue, look, his hands were tied. What's your verdict?
It was classic volte-face stuff, really, from a man who posed for a selfie with Avram Glazer and one of the Glazer relatives who is not Joel Glazer, despite what picture desks continue to try and suggest otherwise. It's happened with others. I mean, Gary Neville was a Glazer apologist up until 2 years ago when the Super League came about and Salford City's place in the Football League was threatened by it. And now Gary Neville is the loudest on of the Glazer out movement, really, it feels like, bar the supporters who go to games. Yet it would have been more impactful if he'd actually said something about them when he was a Man United player. And even when he retired, it wasn't for another 10 years that he decided to unload on the Glazers. And that was probably because of the fact that he's the Salford City co-owner. With Solskjaer, I mean, there were a lot of interesting comments that he made, and he's not wrong when he says Old Trafford has been neglected, Carrington has been neglected, but he'd have got a lot more respect if he'd actually said some of these things in a tactful way when he was manager. The problem is, and Ty and I know from press conferences and the dreaded Zoom call era as well, he was an extremely clunky communicator, and you cannot underestimate that. When you're the Man United manager, you've got to be able to communicate. And it descended into farce in his last weeks when he said verbatim that Marcus Rashford needs to focus more on football. It was words, pretty much almost to that effect. We all reported what he said, and then at the start of his next pretty much press conference, in between they'd got hammered 4-2 at Leicester as well. At the start of his next press conference, he decided to turn on the journalists who were there virtually for apparently spinning it. But that was old order United as well. They didn't communicate as well as they did back then, despite the best attempts of certain personnel at the club. But they didn't have the right manager to do it. The comment about snowflakes in the dressing room, again, he's not wrong about that. I think everyone on this podcast is exempt from it, but there are snowflakes. There are the millennial mentality. It exists in every workplace. We've seen it in the newsroom. This air of entitlement and the feeling, the entitlement that you don't have to actually work hard to get something. I mean, you work. You're about 12, aren't you still, Stephen? And you work as hard as anyone to get your opportunities, and you absolutely, I say it completely objectively, you have the right work ethic, you have the right attitude, but there are some in workplaces who don't, and we all know what that dressing room was like at United, and how the players were indulged, and how really they did ride roughshod over the manager, and they took liberties because they had a substitute teacher in charge, and that's the problem that seemed to be lost on Solskjaer. Yes, it's different to how it was under Roy Keane, and yeah, they wouldn't have survived in the Roy Keane era because times have changed. But if you're a really good manager, you change with the times. He didn't, and also he actually cultivated that culture of the player power era. I mean, he was the manager at the time when United were trying to offer or get Jesse Lingard and Paul Pogba to sign new contracts. Why? He was the manager when Eric Bailly was given a new contract. Again, why? If you're overseeing something like that, you're not going to have great control of the dressing room, and also you're not cultivating the right dressing room. United do not miss any of those three players, and it's a pity for United that Bailly is still contracted at the club, and true to form, he's not going to play enough games for Marseille this season for to trigger their obligation to sign him permanently. So, look, and also, although Solskjaer may grumble over certain individuals in that dressing room, he did mismanage a hell of a lot of them as well. I mean, I can't remember how long ago it was, but we were going through the players he mismanaged, and we'd named three of them, and that was just from the goalkeeping department alone. De Gea got sick and tired of the rotation with Henderson. Henderson obviously made it very plain and clear last year that he was unhappy, to put it mildly, that he wasn't made number one after Solskjaer said he was going to make him number one. Tom Heaton rejoined United on the assumption that he was going to be the number two. He was the number three. So that's just three from the goalkeeping department alone. And there are other players as well who've publicised their misgivings or their unhappiness, and there are others who've been more private about it. But sometimes you've got to look at yourself, and he's not had a job for 18 months now. Even though he did, by and large, reasonably well at United, I'd say he overachieved in that nobody expected him to be there that long. Nobody would have thought Solskjaer would oversee a second place finish, misleading though it was, and pretty meaningless as well, given the training ground atmosphere that games were played out in that season. But he's so associated with United that nobody will touch him with a barge pole, and his greatest feat remains winning the Norwegian League with Molde. And I thought when he left United that, well, Norway national team job, that should be lined up for him. We mentioned that to one of our old Norwegian friends, Arilas, who was at United games very regularly during Solskjaer's first full season, and he told us that Ståle Solbakken is regarded as the better coach in Norway. And Ståle Solbakken was he Wolves manager when they got relegated to League One about 10 or 11 years ago. So, I mean, it almost feels like it's something from the Twilight Zone that Solskjaer ever managed United. And not only did he manage them, he got a new contract, and he was seen by some at the club as being the man to make them a force again. It was good to see that he got a good reception, but he was always going to get a good reception on Saturday because of his playing legacy. He is a legend, and he scored the most replayed and the most famous goal in the club's history, and he endeared himself to United supporters long before that goal at Camp Nou as well. And they'll always cherish those memories. But as a manager, although he had some points when he went to that event on Friday evening, it's easier to say it now, and there were certain things he could have said at the time when he was manager, but he decided against saying them.
It's very well summarised, but I will say, on Samuel's point about me looking 12 years old, I can grow a better facial hair than Samuel, so I can't sleep well at night. I can't sleep well at night.
I do not.
Touché.
I know it's my stubble is it's sometimes you don't want to shave too often. That's what I find anyway. But I am definitely better clean shaven.
Yeah, I mean, Ty's sitting there with his beard. But that's enough for the facial hair chat. We'll be back in a moment for part 3. Ty is a fellow man with a lovely beard across there. I'll come straight at you for part 3. But obviously, a big 3 points, as we've said earlier in the podcast. It takes United level with Newcastle on 66 points. Newcastle drew with Leeds, of course, on the early kick-off on Saturday. Now,
on it.
You have to get that coming in, but of course, Newcastle have got Brighton, Leicester, and Chelsea in the coming weeks. United have got Bournemouth, Chelsea, and Fulham, and now Liverpool are sitting there in 5th, and they can probably smell a bit of blood, I can see, and Jurgen Klopp's probably fancying his chances. But can you see any movement, Ty, from United and Newcastle? Because I feel like everyone I talk to, no matter what camp they're in, you go out in town, you talk to United fans, and they're quite nervous. But potentially missing out on the Champions League. But then I'll talk to Newcastle fans, and they're feeling the exact same way. Both teams are in the same position. They want the 66 points. So do you anticipate that Liverpool can take advantage of either of those two teams, maybe slipping up in the coming weeks?
I think Liverpool obviously would have to win all 3. I'm still not sure that they necessarily do. I think they've got Southampton away on the last day. We'd imagine that's a certainty. But
it's Leicester tonight, isn't it, as we're recording this, I think, yeah.
As much as they concede goals, they score goals as well. I think they've got Villa next week, who are obviously a good team, still in the fight for Europe. So I don't think there's any guarantee Liverpool win all 3. If they do, I think they might get there. I think United will finish 3rd. I would be concerned. I'd be concerned if I was a Newcastle fan, Stephen. Let's put it that way. There's I don't think Newcastle are playing as well as recently. They've basically changed the way they play, it seems, in the last few weeks. They've gone from being this dour team grinding out wins to quite open and having these thrilling games. It feels to me like they've got quite a tough run in. Brighton this week, after what Brighton did on Sunday, is going to be really difficult. They've got Leicester as well. I know it's at home, but Leicester will still be scrapping. And I don't know, would Newcastle want to go to Stamford Bridge on the last day, looking to get something? Maybe. I mean, when you look at where Chelsea are in the league and what they're doing at home, you probably say yes, but it's still Chelsea away, isn't it? A lot of those players are still going to have a point to prove. Lampard's last game. Maybe Pochettino will be there. So I think, Newcastle have got a tougher run than United for me, and United have got to finish third. They should be finishing third from here. They've got Bournemouth, who are safe, and then 2 home games, home against Chelsea and home against Fulham. So I think United should be finishing third from here. I mean, if United finish 5th from here, something is going to go disastrously wrong. I still think they wouldn't. I said last week that they wouldn't want to drop points this week and go into the final week needing to win on Thursday and Sunday to guarantee it. But I still think that if Liverpool do win all 3, I think it's Newcastle who would drop more points from here than United. So I can't really see a scenario where United don't get top 4. And like I say, they should look to go and finish third from here.
I reluctantly agree with that assessment, Ty. It's interesting that he talked about the balance of Newcastle's team and that he didn't want to upset it by playing Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak. And yet the last few games he's tried to shoehorn Isak in on the left wing, Wilson down the middle.
Great to watch though. It made them much better to watch.
Yeah, but I think from a neutral, I think you just need one in the number 9. And obviously I was talking to Samuel about Isak's not a traditional number 9, but he's worked very well there. So it's going to be an interesting last few weeks. Definitely will.
Yes.
Samuel, coming to the end, but you wrote a transfer line today about some players that are set to be released. Obviously, could you expand on that, please, for anyone who hasn't saw it?
There will be more than 5 players that are released. It's 5 certainties or nigh on certainties. The way it's been communicated to me. I mean, Phil Jones. I mean, it's not really a headline that he's going to get released. He started 3 times in. Was it even 3 times? It might be. In fact, it might be only twice in the last 3 years, and he's not trained all season. So United should have released him a long time ago. Never mind this summer. They probably should have released him in 2020, maybe even 2019. There was an opportunity to do so, but that's United and contracts for you. I didn't realise actually how few games Axel Tuanzebe had played on loan at Stoke. Only 5 during his loan spell, which is a disastrous amount, derisory amount as well. But again, that's in keeping with a defender who has had a lot of injury problems since he got his first break into the United squad. I mean, Jones and Tuanzebe, they were actually in the same squad for a game back in 2015. To still be on the books is a failure of United's management. And Tuanzebe, for him, that ship has sailed. There were a couple of opportunities and it didn't happen for whatever reason. And where there's really no resale value there now, it would be something would have to change for him not to be released. There is a +1 option in his contract, but there's not really a lot of logic to extending that. Ethan Galbraith has been told that he'll be released. I think he only ever played once for United, which would have been against Astana. He was one of these players who got a little bit of exposure under Solskjaer. Did quite well, I think, in a pre-season friendly against Villa, but sometimes, particularly with Irish academy players at United, there can be quite a lot of buzz around them because of their nationality and because there's such a huge following in Ireland for United. And Galbraith did make his international debut at quite a young age, but he's gone loan at Salford this season and he's not exactly pulled up trees there. That's 4th tier as well. So I don't think he'll struggle to get a reasonable move in the summer. He's got a good agency looking after him as well now, so I think he's in a reasonable position to go on and have a decent Football League career. And then you've got some lads who a lot of people listening won't have heard of. Andre Masny, a goalkeeper who's been on loan at Portadown. Charlie Wellens, who I think his loan with Oldham actually ended early, mid-season.
Yeah, it ended in December, and he's just been in the academy. I got told in January he was not getting a new contract. So that's the kind of heavyweight exclusives I've been producing recently, Samuel.
Well, yeah, you do yourself down needlessly there. Of course, his father, Richie, who's just overseen Leyton Orient's promotion to League One, he was on United's books many moons ago and would have been in a similar situation, but actually went on to have a pretty good Football League career. And it was also just communicated to me that there would be some under 18s that go as well for their own development. Sometimes when an 18-year-old is released, you immediately think, well, that's quite premature given the age that they sign contracts. Normally it's more 19, 20 that they're released or they're let go, but you still have quite a lot of players at that age level, and if they're not getting the playing time, and it's clear that there's not going to be a pathway to the under-18s or the under-21s the following season, it's in the interests of all parties to move on. And United are very good as well in helping these players. There is a duty of care to them, given that they've brought them up, they've watched them grow into young adults. They want to help them get a move elsewhere, and United still pride themselves on, the academy certainly prides themselves on conducting themselves in that manner, and I'm sure that'll be the case with a lot of them this summer. I think a few years ago when it was obviously the pandemic, and it was obviously particularly uncertain time for a lot of people in various different industries. They allowed some of the players who weren't getting new contracts to still use the facilities at Carrington's. That was a very it was a very pleasant way of going about it, and very, very thoughtful as well. So there'll be more than 5 players released. It's clearly nowhere near as high profile as last year, when it seemed like over a 24-hour period United put out about 4 or 5 different announcements, and about Pamata going, and Pogba, Lingard, and it was quite preposterous. Some of the scripts, how they deified Pogba and gave him it was like an 800-word sign-off, and you thought, cracky, what had he done to deserve that? But anyway, United are a different club this summer, and I suppose it does. It means they're in a better position now that they're not in danger of so many high-profile players going at the end of their contracts, and also there's still a couple of goalkeepers, and that's without mentioning De Gea, that they've got to make decisions on. Nathan Bishop, he's had a strange existence there for nearly 3.5 years. Tom Heaton's 37, he's had a few injury issues as well. Do they extend those deals as well ahead of a summer where they are certainly looking to be open to be in the market for a goalkeeper? So it will still probably break double figures again, the released list, but I think there'll be a few players on there that a lot of fans won't have heard of.
I mean, the majority of players in the academy, the reality is they won't progress to the first team, but I mean, I always say I'm always quite impressed when you look at the players United's academy produces, and then you look down the football leagues and who they're represented by. I think it's impressive down the Championship, League 1, League 2. They might not be good enough to play for Manchester United's first team, but they still go on to have respectable careers, and that's something obviously academy staff are always proud of when you talk about that. But we'll talk about another young stuff. Sorry, Tom.
I think even just for my sins going to watch Rochdale a few weeks ago, I think there are 4 former United Academy players involved in that game. So it goes to show that although that's a long way down the ladder, you're still having a career in the game, and that's the position that a lot of kids end up being in.
Definitely, yeah. Another youngster, Tyrone, I was just going to say before we jump out, we'll have to talk about him because he's been scoring screamers left, right, centre this season. Is Ahmad, just before we jump off. First time against Preston, he got the ball to his feet. What a strike that was. And then the first leg against Luton at the playoffs in the Championship. Obviously, he's had loan at Sunderland this season. That was fantastic. Goal at the Stadium of Light. Now, reluctantly, I will admit he's been fantastic for Sunderland. He's had 13 goals and 3 assists, Tyrone. He's looked really good. But I did my lunch piece on him this afternoon, and supporters are seeing these clips, and I kind of think the temptation, these supporters are, right, get him in the first team, he's ready, you see these goals. But when I've watched him this season, I actually watch him for 90 minutes, he's still very raw, obviously, and he still has lots to work on, which is to be expected of a player of this age. And I think if you look at the players, with just Sancho, you're going to have Garnacho and Rashford on the left, you're going to have Antony on the right. And with Garnacho and Rashford on the left, I was thinking Sancho might be vying for a start on the right next season. Now, we have talked about Sancho's kind of struggles, if you might say. He's not perhaps been the best, but I still think at this stage, Sancho's more likely to be ahead of the pecking order than Ahmad. So I would argue alone would probably be best next season. Ty, how would you see it happening in the summer? Because Ten Hag talked about it, didn't he, recently? And what do you think is going to kind of happen over the next few months and maybe even next season with Ahmad? Because either way, he's an exciting talent, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He's clearly going to go on the tour to the United States and get some chances over there. he adds good balance, I think, to those wing options. Antony's the only left-footed option you've got there. So Ahmad provides good balance. His catalogue of goals this year, as you're saying, is absolutely sensational. He's scoring screamers, and you in your secret admiration of Sunderland, you seem to have watched more of them than I have this season. So you can vouch for the fact that he's not influencing games across 90 minutes, but then maybe he's in good company on the right wing for United there at the moment, you'd say.
He's just a bit raw, isn't he? I think that's the more comment when I watch him. I mean, it's the defensive duties as well.
I think he probably is. He's 20 at the moment, isn't he? I'm not sure. I don't know when his birthday is. I'm not sure when he turns 21. But for the money United paid him, he's 21 in July, so he'll be 21 going into next season. I think for the money United paid for him, he needs to be in the squad next season. Otherwise, you could even consider cashing in and selling him. They paid a huge fee for him. If he goes on loan next season, it needs to be a Premier League club where he's going to be starting and playing every week. So, maybe there's an argument for that. But there's also a point, there comes a point where you have to bring development of players like that in-house and look after them yourselves. And if he is Antony's backup, say, on the right wing, he'd get 30 to 35 games next year. Good chunk of those as substitutes, but he could start all the cup games. There's league games he could start. So I think next year you'd probably want him. I personally would say keep him at the club, have him as Antony's backup, and see how he goes and take it from there. But it is an issue on the wing because, I did a piece on it for lunch as well. All of those options, if you're looking at 5 wingers from Rashford, Garnacho, Sancho, Antony and Ahmad, they're all under 25. So you don't need a succession plan. So you don't need to be keeping Ahmad going at 20 because Antony's 22. So there's not like, 23 now. So there's not like you're blooding someone for the next generation and you've just spent 85 million on Antony. So there might come a point with Ahmad where you do just have to say, right, you've done well for us, but we're going to sell you. Because it's, if Ahmad does kick on from that loan and becomes as good as people in Europe thought he was going to when United signed him from Atalanta, there's going to come a point where United just can't keep Rashford, Garnacho, Antony, Ahmad happy, because already you're thinking with Rashford and Garnacho, there comes a point there where one of them's going to need to change position or do something a bit different, because the way Garnacho's going, by the end of next season at least, he's probably going to want to be and expect to be starting games every week. So they are flush with talent out wide and young talent as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But I think keep Ahmad next year, see how it goes, and then maybe make a decision on him in 2024.
With Samuel nodding along, it sounds like I'm very overworried on the stance of his future, which means he'll inevitably score 25 goals next season. He'll become first choice at right wing.
No, I was actually I was disagreeing with an element of Ty's argument. Astonishingly, I think it is probably manageable to have those 4 players around, in that you have got, you look at City, and I know it's easy to always look at City as the benchmark, but United have got 2 players per position, and you don't hear many of them complaining about it. Bernardo Silva, it seemed like he's wanted out in a very respectful way for a few years, but if it doesn't happen, he doesn't mind, he gets on with his job. He may finally go this summer, but they've got 2 players per position, and none of them are missing out when it comes to international commitments. None of them, you don't hear any murmurings about them wanting out at all at the moment. And I think if you need 2 per position anyway, so I think that's completely logical. The one who has got to be in jeopardy is Sancho, because it is very easy for Ten Hag to divorce himself from a player who's signed on Solskjaer's watch. Antony is his signing. Garnacho is the player he's brought in. Although Ahmad was signed on Solskjaer's watch, he barely got a look in, and he's looking like a pretty serious footballer now, to the point that maybe Ten Hag said last week that he's going to be his future's at United, so it'll be interesting to see if he does keep his word on that. But Sancho is an easy fall guy there, despite the obvious problem, as Ty said earlier. You're not sure what market is out there for him. United are either loaning him out and getting him off the books salary-wise for a season, which they have done a couple of times over the last year with Henderson, Telles and Bailly. so more than a couple of times, because I just don't see a club that are going to pay £40 million for a player whose his return this season has been underwhelming, to put it politely, and he missed 3 months of it as well. You know, you'd possibly say, well, Tottenham could do with Sancho, but I don't think Tottenham are going to be signing him permanently from United. And you would also say, if you're in Tottenham's position, go for James Maddison instead, because he is going to be sold by Leicester this summer.
He feels like a Tottenham player, doesn't he, when I watch Maddison? Do you know what, Samuel? I played devil's advocate with that City
I thought
point.
Newcastle. I thought Maddison and Isak in the Newcastle attack. I think that would be right up Geordie's alley.
I would not say no to that. I was just going to end and say I played devil's advocate with the City point by saying I think why City's players don't moan and you don't hear whispers of that is because there's a guarantee of silverware, and that kind of compensates for it. If you look at Calvin Phillips, for example,
of course, yeah.
He's not playing, is he? But he probably thinks, do you know what, go to City, I know I'm not going to play as much, but I'm going to win a trophy, I'm going to win the Premier League and go play somewhere else.
You say Calvin Phillips? Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that one is that experiment has failed.
But that's what I mean. But he's going to leave with a Premier League winners medal, and he's probably going to think, right, you know what? At least I've won the league now. He can go and make 200 appearances.
I think City would have expected him to play a lot more than he has done. And the other thing they've got at is they've got players like, you know, Mahrez is a good example, who is in and out of the team a bit. But realistically, is he going to do any better than City?
No,
Probably not. You know, I guess the issue for United, certainly on the left, is if
maybe?
Garnacho develops as he does, then it's going to be a case that Real Madrid or Barcelona want him, and when that happens, it's, you know, he needs to be playing every week at United to keep him, and then you've got the issue of Rashford, I guess. So, but it's a good situation to have that you've basically got two players who could be world class vying for the same position.
PSG's not a bad shout. I'm going to go place a fire after this podcast on Mahrez to PSG in the summer win, because Messi is going to be moving with Messi, he's going to be moving with Neymar. So thanks, Samuel. I'll buy you a pack when that comes in. But thanks again for your times, lads. Thank you very much, Samuel.
Thank you. You need to get either a betting firm or a razor blade manufacturer to sponsor this podcast, I think, after today.
Hey, well, Liam's been joking that I should join the Racing Post as a racing journalist, so I might just take that up instead. And Tyrone, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners. As usual, head across to YouTube. We've now surpassed 2,000 subscribers. So thanks for your support across there. And as usual, we're available on all good audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, etc. So have a great week. We'll be back on Friday. Thank you very much.